The U.S., the EU, and Canada have called for the immediate release of Kremlin critic Alexei Navalny. He was arrested after landing in a Moscow airport on his return from Berlin. Navalny had been in Germany recovering from a nerve agent attack last August, which he blames on the Kremlin. Russian authorities said they'd detained Navalny for violating the terms of a suspended prison sentence.
A kiss goodbye, then he's taken. Alexei Navalny is arrested at passport control just minutes after expressing hope he might go free. I'm not afraid. I'll calmly go through border control. I'll cross the border and go home. I know I'm right. All legal actions against me are fake. Just minutes earlier, Navalny's plane had landed unexpectedly at Moscow's Sheremetyevo airport. It had been diverted from a different Moscow airport where it had previously been expected to land. There, dramatic scenes unfolded. Police arrested dozens of Navalny supporters who wanted to greet the Kremlin critic personally. Authorities had declared their presence illegal and blocked access to the terminal with police vehicles. Some Kremlin observers say the response shows the Russian government is afraid of Navalny. Navalny is dangerous. Otherwise, they wouldn't want to imprison or kill him. He is fearless, and now he's also famous, even outside of Russia. That is exactly what the Kremlin doesn't want. Opposition politicians who are recognized by 70 or 80% of the population and who cannot be controlled. On August 20th last year, Navalny was admitted to hospital in Omsk, Siberia, after he lost consciousness on a flight. Navalny's wife asked President Vladimir Putin permission to send her husband to Germany for treatment. Surprisingly, the Kremlin allowed it. Navalny was treated for several weeks at the Charité hospital in Berlin. During this time, German army scientists found evidence that the Russian had been poisoned with the nerve agent Novichok. Other Western experts came to the same conclusion. Russia, meanwhile, dismissed the allegations as a political ploy by the West and has so far refused to investigate the attack. When asked about Navalny at his annual press conference, Vladimir Putin responded with mockery. Who needs him? If we had wanted to, we would have finished him off. Putin was responding to Navalny's allegations that a so-called killer squad from the domestic intelligence agency, the FSB, had poisoned him. But instead of addressing these allegations, Moscow has now put Navalny behind bars.
And we have team coverage on this story. Emily Sherwin is our correspondent in Moscow, and Jared Reed is at our parliamentary studios here in Berlin. Emily, Navalny barely survived the poisoning last August. Why did he decide to go back to Russia where the same could happen again?
Well, you know, Terry, I think all opposition activists here in Russia know that it's risky to be a Kremlin critic, and that's what they regularly tell me. People regularly tell me that they would be even willing to die for their cause, and I think that you can probably say the same about Alexei Navalny. We saw in that statement that he made at the airport upon his arrival that Alexei Navalny says he's not afraid. He has said in the past that leaving Russia was actually not his choice. He was brought there in a coma, and that's why coming back isn't a choice either. He never questioned that choice. That's what he's said repeatedly since he woke up from that coma. He knows, I think, though, also that if he didn't come back to Russia, he could run the risk of potentially slipping into kind of irrelevance going forward, political irrelevance, by not being here in Russia, in the country, especially ahead of parliamentary elections here, Duma elections in the country, which are scheduled to take place later this year, where Alexei Navalny plans to lead the charge on this kind of strategic voting strategy, which he's been advocating, where he wants people to vote for the candidate most likely to beat Vladimir Putin's United Russia Party.
Well, Navalny's arrest has drawn massive international condemnation. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has called it the latest in a series of Russian attempts to silence Navalny. And the EU's Foreign Affairs Chief, Josep Borrell, called on Russian authorities to respect Navalny's rights and release him immediately. Jared, What's the German government saying about Navalny's arrest in Russia?
Well, German Foreign Minister Heiko Maas has called for Navalny's immediate release. He said that Navalny returned to Russia of his own free will, and he described Russia as Navalny's personal and political home and said it was incomprehensible that he had been arrested upon his arrival back in Russia. Maas also repeated the German government's position that Alexei Navalny was the victim of a crime. Last September, Angela Merkel described it as an attempted murder with a nerve agent. There, of course, had been fears for Navalny's safety upon his arrival in Russia. And last week, a government spokesman was asked whether the government had tried to discourage Alexei Navalny from going back at all. And what Stefan Seibert, the government spokesman, said was that the government was glad that Alexei Navalny had recovered enough to a point where he felt ready to return home.
Some countries, Jared, are calling for sanctions to be imposed on Russia in relation to this case. Do you know if Germany is likely to join those calls for sanctions?
I think it's probably a little bit too early to say that yet, but what Germany has repeated is that it wants Russia to invest the energy that it is currently using in prosecuting Alexei Navalny and use that energy in actually investigating what happened to him. What we found out over the weekend is that transcripts of interviews carried out by Berlin prosecutors with Alexei Navalny were given to Russian prosecutors. And what the German government said was that now it has these transcripts and it also has forensic evidence like blood, tissue and clothing samples, that all of this together is more than enough, all that it needs to carry out a thorough investigation into what happened to Alexei Navalny. The government saying that any investigation should be carried out inside Russia.
Emily, Alexei Navalny is clearly a thorn in Vladimir Putin's side. How is Russia likely to deal with him now?
Well, I think that for the Kremlin, certainly going forward, having Alexei Navalny back in Russia is, as you say, a thorn in their side, certainly an inconvenience, as I said, ahead of the Duma elections, which are coming up. We don't, of course, know what will happen to Alexei Navalny. He's in pretrial detention now, and the prison service has recommended that his conditional sentence, on an old embezzlement conviction should be turned into real jail time. It could that could mean that Alexei Navalny could be put behind bars for quite a long time. We don't know. We do know that if there are sanctions, if there are words condemning Russia from the EU, as we've been seeing, that kind of, in a sense, is old news for the Kremlin, and they'll probably just continue doing what they want.
Emily in Moscow and Jared here in Berlin, thank you very much to you both.